Ishmael Sistrunk from the St. Louis American and STLAmerican.com. Coming here today with our In the Clinch boxing hangout. Looks like today I'm going to be doing a solo hangout. We had some of our regular guys that had other commitments come up, but there's so much going on in the boxing world that we got to get this in. We got to get to talk about this. So you guys will just get to hear my opinion and my opinion only, especially on this weekend's fights. We had a great one. This weekend we had the Knockout Kings 2 card down in San Antonio, or should I say San Diego, Mr. Keith Thurman, but down in San Antonio, Texas. A great card that was put on by Showtime and Golden Boy Promotions. Had 3 excellent fights, and if you looked at the card before it aired, you knew that we were in for some potential treats of the matchups. Of course, if you look at the name Knockout Kings, that seems to imply, hey, these guys have power, somebody can go to sleep. But of course, in the world of boxing, you never know. Everything is hype, everything is, talked up really, really big, but sometimes we don't always get the bang for that buck. For this particular card, from what I've seen, this is by far the best card that we've seen this year. It doesn't necessarily mean it has the biggest names. None of these guys, maybe arguably Andre Berto, sort of a household name. Not really, amongst hardcore boxing fans, but, none of these guys were really household names, but all of these guys came to put on a show, and it was impressive. So first, let's look at Keith Thurman, the welterweight, had a 10th round stoppage of Diego Chavez. This bout was very interesting. If you look at Chavez, he's really the first fighter that Thurman has faced that really, has some credibility. He was an undefeated fighter. He's a guy from Argentina, comes forward, the way that a lot of the Latino Hispanic fighters come forward and fight with blood and guts. That's the type of fighter that Chavez is. So we learned a lot about Keith Thurman in this bout. Mainly when you looked at the fight from the beginning, we knew Keith Thurman, hey, he's a big, strong guy. He comes to get guys out of there. He has a reputation for knockouts. So we knew that he was going to try to impose his will on Chavez. But what we learned early on is that Chavez wasn't going anywhere. Over the first couple of rounds, they stood toe-to-toe. They traded. They each tried to break each other's will. And I don't remember if it was 3rd or 4th round. You can see for Thurman, as he got hit, some people say he had a broken nose. I'm not sure if that was ever confirmed. But you see when he took some shots going toe-to-toe, he decided to change up the plan a little bit. He decided to start utilizing some lateral movement, start utilizing some boxing, whereas up to this point, he's really been a guy who's relied on his power. He's really tried to get guys out of there, sits on his punches well, throws hard punches, and sometimes he even, seems to fall in love with his power. But he's been able to knock everybody out. He's sitting at 21-0 now, 19 KOs, so he has a lot of faith in his power. But the thing that I really like to see in that matchup was when the power wasn't getting it done alone, when he was sitting there eating shots and maybe in a little bit of danger himself, he had the wherewithal to change the game a little bit. He had the boxing acumen to go and, switch it up, to use his jab, to move side to side, and began to outbox Chavez throughout a lot of the middle rounds. And what that ended up doing was allowing him to come and get the late knockout. We saw in the, I believe it was the 9th round, he dropped Chavez with a vicious body shot that I didn't even know if Chavez was going to get up from that. And then after that, in the 10th round, he was able to put him away, coming back with some hard combinations. But if you look again at that fight, in the middle rounds, we saw Thurman utilizing that boxing skills. He kind of wore Chavez down a little bit, or not even wore him down, but he just set him up. When you're able to use those boxing skills, to use that jab, to use that movement, you set guys up. They're going to get more desperate. They're going to start lunging in more. And as the fight wore on and they both got a little more tired, we saw Thurman was able to capitalize on go back to the power and get the knockout. So for Keith Thurman, that sets up a lot of good things for him with that knockout. Of course, they had I believe it was like a $10,000 bonus for the knockout victory. Keith Thurman ended up getting that. Some people thought maybe he didn't deserve it. You know, it was a great fight. It was a spectacular knockout. Dropped him twice. I have no beef with him getting that knockout bonus. But for Keith Thurman, after the fight, they talked to him. They asked him, you know, who do you want to fight next? Again, this guy, 21-0, so he's still a young guy. He's still not a household name, even though this fight's really going to put him on the map. But they asked him, who's he want next? He named everybody in the welterweight division, you know, the players that you want to hear him call out. Dr. Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez, Tim Bradley, Devin Alexander, Marcos Maidana, Adrian Broner. I think he said who he wanted the most was Marcos Maidana, who he's, I guess, been trying to get a fight with. He thinks Maidana's ducking him, doesn't want to fight him. So out of those fights, you know, I think the Broner fight and I think the Maidana fight, both of those would be very, very interesting. You know, if I'm Thurman's promoter, I'm looking at that Maidana fight very well because, you know, this is going to be, if they were to get together, it's two guys who come forward, two guys who are going for the knockout. But we know Maidana's still in the process of acclimating himself to the welterweight. So I think that's probably maybe a little safer fight. I mean, he's going to have to go through hell to beat Marcos Maidana, but it's possible. I think he could do it. And if you look at him and he goes and let's say he fights Maidana, gets another spectacular knockout, his profile is going to raise higher. And at that point, that's when you can start to look at some of these other guys. I don't think you go from Maidana to Mayweather, but you go from Maidana maybe to Broner, or you go from Maidana to Devin Alexander if that fight's open. And if he wins that fight again, well, then you're talking about Mayweather because you've got 3 impressive victories in a row. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm not saying that you should expect him to do that, but I do like his choice of opponents when he's saying he wants Marcos Maidana. I think that will be a great fight. I don't know if you put that on another card, Billet Knockout Kings 3, but I think that'll be a spectacular fight. And whoever he fights, you know, I'm definitely interested. He's one of these guys, you know, he's coming to knock guys out, and you got to appreciate that. He has a lot of heart. He has some boxing skill now. I don't think he's going to get in and be outboxing Floyd Mayweather or even Adrian Broner, but, you know, if he can be a boxer-puncher, you know, and be able to do both things well, we know he's got the punching power, but if he can continue to improve those boxing skills and show those, you know, who knows, the sky's the limit for him. All right, so next on that Showtime card, we had a lightweight bout, Omar Figueroa Jr. against Nahito Arakawa. Oddly enough, this was a fight that went the distance. Figueroa won a unanimous decision, went all 12 rounds, but this has a lot of people talking about fight of the year candidate, and it definitely instantly was. I mean, watching that fight, you know, you get back visions of Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward, you know what I'm saying? And I don't throw around that lightly because that's, you know, when you look at fights, you know, or trilogies or things like that, that's the one that, you know, stands above, you know, most other ones. But, you know, this fight, these guys went toe to toe. I mean, it was insane. If you sit and just look, you know, it were times where I'm cringing, you know, I'm just sitting there and they were literally, well, not literally, but, you know, they were fighting in a phone booth. These guys were shoulder to shoulder. They were toe to toe. Arakawa, he's not as big a puncher as Figueroa, and some people were worried about that. You know, Arakawa said, hey, I'm going to be right there with them leading up to the fight. I'm not going anywhere. And people wondered if he was just talking because he's not known as a big knockout guy. But he was true to his word, and he stood there, and they traded. And, I mean, as a fight fan, this is a fight fan dream right here, the way that they fought. We didn't see, like I said, we didn't get a knockout, but even though we had knockouts in the other 2 bouts, this was more exciting, and it was just because of the will that these 2 guys showed. And so, you know, the way I look at it, Figueroa and Arakawa, any fight that they're in, I'm going to watch it. You know, they they've got, there's some guys, when you look, especially like you listen to music and you hear a certain guy, you may say, okay, Jay-Z, I'm copping that off top. So if I hear Jay-Z dropping, I'm getting it. If I hear Kanye dropping, I'm getting it. If I hear, whoever it is for you, and it's like with these two guys, they at least got me watching for at least the next two bouts. I don't care who they're fighting. But this fight was so exciting, and you have to wonder, are they going to do it again? Because this fight was so good just from an action-packed standard that you have to imagine that the promoters are going to try to get them in there again. The only thing that you wonder, though, when you actually look at the scorecards, it wasn't that close. Figueroa, he won more rounds clear cut, even though they were tough rounds, even though they were hard fought rounds. It wasn't like this was a razor thin margin. It wasn't like this was a 115, 113 bout. Figueroa won comfortably, but he had to earn it. And so if they do it again, I'm definitely going to watch. I almost would like to see them in with somebody else and see what they can do, and maybe come back together again at a later date. Because that fight was just so demanding, so punishing. You hate to see those guys get in there and just have careers shortened. We've seen so many times, where people have these brutal trilogies, and their career is basically over after that. But this was definitely an exciting fight. Fight of the night, definitely fight of the year candidate. I don't know if it's going to win because these guys are lower profile. They're lightweights. They really weren't well known coming into the fight, and a lot of times if you get a higher profile fight that's almost as exciting, they're going to get the nod just because of that level. But in terms of the action, you can't beat this fight here. And it was just wonderful. I was glad to see it. And after the fight, I believe Figueroa, he knew where he was. He knew he was in San Antonio, not San Diego. But again, I just enjoyed to watch. It was a pleasure. So let's move on to the main event of the fight, where we saw Andre Berto matched up against Jesus Soto Karass. Berto was the favorite. He was the Al Heyman fighter. People wanted to see if he could redeem himself coming off of some losses and some subpar non-Andre Berto looking, and he ended up losing this fight. Got stopped in the 12th and final round in what was an exciting bout. And for me, watching this fight, I thought Soto Karass, I thought he led this bout. I thought he controlled the bout. That's the word I'm looking for. A lot of the way. And even though Berto, I think he hurt his left shoulder around the 4th round or so. But even with that, I think Soto Karass was just he just led the action. He threw stiffer punches. He landed that big right hand a lot. When you look at Andre Berto, he reminds me a lot of Jeff Lacey. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean in their fight styles or how they handle themselves in the ring. But if you remember back to Jeff Lacey was a guy who he got a lot of hype. He was a big guy, big, strong, muscle-bound guy. Had some knockouts early in his career and built up this hype. And so everybody said, okay, Jeff Lacey, he's that dude. He's this guy that's coming. He's going to terrorize everybody. And his name got elevated, I think more because of his stature. And Andre Berto's kind of that same guy. He's a big, strong guy. He's fast. He, has good combinations, good movement. He does a lot of things well, but Andre Berto's never really been that elite fighter. Yes, he's held some titles, but he just hasn't gotten to that elite level. And I think, sometimes we try to put that on him, but he's not been that guy, and that's why he's had some losses. But the one thing you can't take from him, like I said, I'm not trying to diss Berto, he has heart. He definitely has heart. Like I said, he won this fight with an injured shoulder. He fought one-handed for 5 or 6 rounds in the fight, largely. Took a lot of hard shots before he got put down. But he made this an interesting fight the whole way. And even though I think the final scorecards, which going into the last round, before the knockout, the judges actually had it scored a draw. It would have been a draw. One had it even, one had it for Soto Karass, and one had it for Berto. Now, of course, the knockdown in the last round, you figure Soto Karass would have won anyway. But going into that last round, it was a draw, which for me is crazy. And like I said, I thought Andre Berto did a good job. I thought he fought well. I thought um, he showed himself well. I made a few steroid jokes about Berto, but like I said, I respect him. He has heart. He has talent. I just don't think he's an elite level fighter. Um, but at the same time, the fact that the judges had him up, and let's be honest, we're in San Antonio. We've seen a lot of questionable scores, of questionable decisions in Texas fights. Anytime you get outside of Las Vegas or maybe Atlantic City, to some of these states that don't host boxing on that type of level as often, sometimes we see, these hometown decisions, or not necessarily hometown, but the favorite fighter, or the fighter who's um, you know the cash cow for the promoter. We see them get scores or decisions that they don't deserve. So for Soto Karass, I'm glad. How many times have we seen fighters who feel they're winning comfortably on the scorecards take their foot off the gas? And how bad would it have been if Soto Karass would have, said, "Hey, I got this fight in the bag." Just tried to lay back in that 12th and final round, just move around, try to stay out of danger's way, and then ended up losing the bout. Like I said, for me, he was up enough. He was up comfortably. It wasn't like he was blowing it out, but he was up enough for me. If he lost that last round, he still should have won the fight. So the fact that he was in a position to lose it, I definitely salute him for going in there saying, "Hey, I got to get this guy out of here. I don't trust the judges. I'm going to let my fist be the judge." And so I'm glad to see that, and I hope other fighters take notice, because if there's one thing that's certain in boxing, the scoring is always uncertain. You never know. We've seen a lot of bad decisions. We've seen a lot of close decisions. You just never know. So if you have that opportunity, you got to go for the knockout. And especially this card again, Knockout Kings 2. So I think he had that in his mind. I think he had that $10,000 bonus in his mind, and that's something that we've seen the UFC do, give knockout bonuses, give submission bonuses. Of course, we don't have submissions in boxing, but I think that is a good type of incentive to get fighters going for the knockouts, because the fans, that's really what they want to see. They want to see guys get stoppage. And I think for, I don't know, maybe the past decade even, we've seen certain stars who are more safety first. And if you don't have any power, you have to be like that. A guy like St. Louis's own Corey Spinks, he never had a lot of power, so he's not going to be a guy knocking you out. So he had to box like that. Pauline Malignaggi, he's a guy, he doesn't have a whole lot of power, so he has to box. But we've seen guys who we know have some power, just play that safety role. They don't want to get hit, and so that takes the level of excitement down a little bit. So it was very refreshing to see this particular card, where all three bouts, guys were going for knockouts. Pretty much the whole fight. Like I said, the second fight with Figueroa and Arakawa, we didn't get a knockout, but that was actually the best fight of the night. And, it was just wonderful to see. So I was glad to see it. That brings me to this week's article in the St. Louis American, stlamerican.com. I wrote about Showtime versus HBO. This is something that's picked up steam lately. Basically with the signing of Floyd Mayweather going to Showtime, and actually Showtime had pilfered off some of Golden Boy's fighters before then. I think that may have been the last straw. But once Mayweather went over to Showtime, Broner had went over to Showtime. Alvarez, I believe, had already went over to Showtime. Once we saw those defections, HBO pretty much got mad and said, "You know what? We're not doing business with Golden Boy anymore. You want to take your fighters over there? Take them all over there." That was a risky strategy because, let's be honest, Golden Boy Promotions right now has the best stable in boxing. They're putting on the best shows. They have the most talent. Oscar De La Hoya and Richard Schaefer have really done something well over there, and they're putting together a nice promotional team. So for HBO, who has really, kind of led the boxing action, as far as a network, they've been the premier cable network with boxing. For them to just say, okay, we're not doing business with any of your fighters, it's a risk. And I'm sure Showtime was ecstatic over it. And even since then, since Showtime has gotten to the Golden Boy business, it seems like Golden Boy is actually, I don't know if they're thumbing up their nose at HBO, but they're putting on better fights after going over. Before on HBO, a lot of times they like to build up fighters. And again, this is the thing over the past, I don't know, decade, 15 years, where we've seen a lot of fighters, being kind of, catered to, brought along really slowly, looking spectacular against, average or below average opponents, getting those knockouts, building their name up, and then finally putting them in there with live competition. Now we're seeing Golden Boy just put guys together. We're seeing undefeated young fighters, and they're just throwing them in there. They're saying, hey, you guys got to earn it. We're not going to build you up slowly. You're going to have to build yourself up. And again, that's a win-win for fight fans, because we don't know the winner. A lot of times, in recent years, when you see these matchups, you already know who's going to win. It's like, okay, maybe I'm going to turn in, I'm going to watch this fighter. I know he's going to win, but I just want to watch him. I want to, follow his career, see how he looks this time. Now it seems like what Golden Boy is doing is, they're taking that away. Like, you may have a favorite, but you don't know. You don't know, and that's a big part of being a boxing fan. That what draws you in is because you don't know who's going to win. People are going to prove it in the ring. It's not just like, okay, we giving this guy this golden slipper, and we're going to just string him along until he makes it. No, they're putting those guys in with each other, dog eat dog, and it's great. And that's how Showtime has been looking this year, how Golden Boy has been looking this year. So you go back over to HBO, and they're finding themselves in a position of having to build up fighters. And HBO, I mean, they've done that for a long time, been able to build up stars. So they have some good fighters over at HBO right now. They got Andre Ward. He gets a bad rap sometimes because he doesn't knock everybody out. Some people want to call him a boring fighter. I love Andre Ward. I love watching him. He's a guy. He's a boxer puncher. He has phenomenal technique. If you look at him, most people call him number 2 on the pound for pound list. He has good movement. He's fast. He has good defense. He has power. He's shown that power. The thing that you forget about when talking about Andre Ward, or looking at his knockout percentage, but I mean, he's run through the gauntlet. When you look at the 168-pound division, super middleweights, I mean, he's fought everybody. He's cleaned that division out pretty much. And so we talked about it with Devin Alexander a while ago. It's like when you're fighting top-tier competition every time out, when you're not taking these gimmies, when you're not taking these pancake opponents, you're not going to knock everybody out. You know what I'm saying? And so people have to understand that with Ward, he's fighting the best of the best every time. So I'm looking forward to see what happens next with Andre Ward specifically. Like I said, I'm a big fan, but it doesn't look like HBO knows exactly what they want to do with him. So Erde has called him out. I believe he's like 40 years old now. He lost his last bout. He says it was a robbery. I didn't see the bout. He says it was a robbery, so he should be able to get in there with Andre Ward. Who knows? He's probably the biggest name right now that HBO can get. But I don't know, coming off that loss, the way boxing is now, if you lose, people pretty much want to throw you to the dogs. Back in the day, as long as the best were fighting the best, if you lost, it didn't matter. We're going to put you in here with another guy. But now it seems like when somebody tries to lose, it's almost like, well, you're almost out of here now. You lose again, it's over. So I don't know if they'll do that with Zolt Erde. You also have talk of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And Andre Ward getting together. We know Chavez is a big name. You know, Chavez brings a lot of fans, a lot of popularity. Personally, I think that would be all bad for Chavez Jr. He's lazy. He's not been training hard. He's smoking, got in trouble for smoking, working out at home. He really would need to bring his A game. He's a big, strong kid, but I think Ward would make him look terrible. But with that said, I would still love to see the fight because I actually like Chavez Jr. I wish he would work a little harder and maybe fighting the pound for pound number two guy, maybe the consensus champion at 168. Maybe that's going to be enough to light that fire in his behind and get him going. So I would like to see it. I don't know. I hear Chavez likes it. I don't know if his handlers are going to like it because, like I said, I think he'll he'll get done pretty bad in that. Other names, Carl Froch. He's been very impressive lately. He talked a little bit after he beat Mikkel Kessler. He talked a little bit about wanting to get back in there with Andre Ward. Again, I think some of that's lip service. I think he really doesn't want to fight Ward, but he doesn't want to look like he's scared. He's a proud guy. He's a great man. If Andre Ward wasn't around right now, if he wasn't fighting, Carl Froch, he'd be number one in that division. He'd be the guy who cleaned out that division. He's an excellent fighter, but Andre Ward is just all bad for him. He boxed circles around him when they fought before. Same thing with Mikkel Kessler. And I definitely don't think he wants any part of Andre Ward. So, well, like I said, we'll have to see what's going on with Andre Ward. They're trying to get him a good fight. My guess is HBO will end up greenlighting Zoe Erde maybe, or if they can get the Chavez Jr. fight going, they may do that. There's talk about trying to get Andre Ward to move up to fight one of the light heavies. We saw Chad Dawson. We saw Chad Dawson come down to super middleweight to fight Andre Ward, and that went all bad for him. And some of the other guys who are fighting at light heavyweight now, they fought at 168 before, so maybe that can be a catch weight. Maybe Ward moves up. Personally, I think Ward should stay at 168. Yeah, he's cleaned out the division, but when you look at a guy like Bernard Hopkins, who reigned at middleweight for so long, in any weight class, you're going to have periods where there's a lot of talent. You're going to have some lean periods, but boxers in the 80s and the 70s, a lot of those guys, they got a weight class and they stayed there and they handled their business, and they moved up when they were ready, whether it was for another opponent or whatever. Now I think we expect fighters, after looking what Manny Pacquiao did, what Floyd Mayweather did, Tito Trinidad when he started his ascension up through the ranks. We see these guys, and so now it's like we expect it. It's like, okay, once you beat 2 or 3 top fighters in your division, it's like, okay, it's time to move up. You got to fight somebody else. I think that should be the fighter's prerogative. I don't think the promoter should push him to move up. I don't think the network should push him to move up. I think all of that should be on the fighter. Andre Ward, clearly he can make 168. He hasn't had any problems making weight that I know of. And I think he can stay there and dominate for a while. And, in a year or two, you may see guys, or maybe even before that, you see guys like Gennady Golovkin. He's been having some chatter about moving up to 168 to fight Andre Ward. Again, I think that fight is a little bad for Golovkin, but that just states how good Andre Ward is. It's the same thing. You talk about Floyd Mayweather. A lot of times, people bring up potential opponents and people will dismiss him. Oh, he can't beat him. It just speaks to how good that he is. But at the same time, you never know until you get into the ring. How many times have we seen a fighter who can't lose? So you got to prove it in the ring. And Andre Ward, from what I've seen, he's pretty much willing to fight anybody. I think he does need to get out of Cali, maybe go fight in Las Vegas. And for HBO, it's not the worst thing in the world if you match him up with some unknown, some tough competition, but some unknown guys. Maybe that he can get out of there, get a couple exciting knockouts on his record. So by the time somebody else is ready, you build him up into more of a to more of a big name fighter. Because Andre Ward, even though he's one of the best, he's still not necessarily a big draw, right now, which is I think is a shame, but you know that's the reality. So, but besides Andre Ward, HBO, they do have some other fighters, like I said, Chavez Jr. Um, they've got a lot going on, but the thing is, to be honest, right now, I think Showtime is kind of taking that pole position from them, but we know HBO has a big budget. HBO has a lot of history, and like I said, they'll be able to, like a guy like Golovkin, who's really just starting to get on the scene, on everybody's radar. He was kind of an underground star for a while, but now HBO is putting some marketing dollars. If he stays at middleweight, he can be a guy that that gets some pay-per-views. He can be a guy that gets a title, holds a title for a while, able to unify and things like that. So I think HBO will build some stars, but I think they see what's going on at Showtime, and they're changing their strategy as well, to where, okay, we can't just try to put star against regular fighter, here and make this boring fight just to showcase our stars. We got to test our stars. That's what they're going to have to do, because that's what they're doing over at Showtime. So at the end of the day, and we've talked about it before with Mike Dixon when he's on. At the end of the day, competition is good for fight fans. Anytime you get these two, HBO and Showtime, going back and forth, now you see CBS, who owns Showtime, getting into it. ESPN, of course, has always had a lot of fights. Fox Sports, I think it's Fox Sports who's getting a Monday night boxing show with Golden Boy. So you're starting to see boxing show up a lot more. You're seeing a little bit of it on network TV. You're seeing more of it on some of the smaller regional sports channels. And of course, you're always going to see it on HBO and Showtime. So for me, it's been a great 2013 has been a great year for boxing. And when you look back and you see all these fights that weren't made, Mayweather and Pacquiao, and just a lot of the other fights that didn't happen because of this beef between Top Rank and Golden Boy. Now we're starting to see fights being made, and there's still a cold war going on between the promoters. But the thing is, since HBO doesn't deal with Golden Boy anymore, now they're with Top Rank, they're with Main Events. They're trying to make things happen between them. And Golden Boy, they just have a big enough stable between them and, working with Mayweather. They have a big enough stable where they can just put on fights amongst each other, or pull, other fighters who aren't in business with Top Rank or maybe Main Events, and they're able to put on a lot of quality shows. So definitely looking forward for the rest of 2013. Speaking of, excuse me, Mayweather, of course, they announced that on the undercard of Mayweather and Alvarez, we're going to see Lucas Matisse and Danny Garcia. That's a bout that a lot of people have been looking forward to. Another bout that some people didn't think was going to happen. They thought Danny Garcia wouldn't want any part of Lucas Matisse after his last impressive stoppage. But that's a fight. It's an undercard bout. That's a bout that could have been a headliner on its own. So it's going to be an undercard bout on that on the Mayweather Alvarez, which makes it even more impressive. They're starting to stack these cards again from top to bottom. Again, it's not just, we've seen a lot in recent years where you're just trying to, okay, we're getting this prospect, this rising prospect, let's put him on this undercard to get him some exposure. Now you're not seeing that as much. You're seeing them, if they're putting rising prospects, it's two prospects against each other. Or, in this case with Matisse and Garcia, it's two guys who are really, in demand, two guys who have been, getting impressive knockouts, who've been doing big things, and they're fighting each other. It's a highly demanded fight, and so putting that on the undercard, it makes it more attractive. So definitely can't wait for that card. Big props, again, to Golden Boy and Showtime for what they're doing. They're picking up the boxing game, and it's good for fans, and it's trickling down. People have been saying for how long that boxing is dead. but you see the money that's made. You know, you see when Showtime throws all this money at Floyd Mayweather Jr., you see, you know, these fighters are making 10, 15 million in a match, or Floyd Mayweather's making 30 million, you know, and up, you know, in a match. You know, and that's not average. A lot of the average fighters, you know, they may, if they're on the headline, they may make 2 million or something like that. Um, but still, you're seeing a lot of money being made. You're seeing a lot of pay-per-views being bought. You're seeing a lot of shows being sold out. So I think that's definitely good for the game. So definitely appreciative. I want to see more between Showtime and HBO going back and forth. It looks like, you know, now that CBS is behind Showtime, they got more of a budget. They're getting a more subscription base. And again, sorry to keep repeating it, but that's good for fight fans. So thanks for tuning in. That's all I have for this week. Like I said, I had to do the show solo. I think we're going to go back to Sundays. We tried Mondays out for a while. In the last couple of weeks, you know, it just was, you know, nothing really going on. So that's why we went on. But with St. Louis Rams coming up, I think I'm going to start doing Rams Hangouts on Mondays. So start looking out for that in the next couple of weeks. But for the boxing, we're going to try to go back to Sundays at 8 o'clock. Anybody who wants to get in, you know, especially in the Google Plus group, Boxing Enthusiasts, hit me up either on my personal page. Just look up my name, Ishmael Sistrom, or here on the St. Louis American page. If you want to get involved in the Clench Boxing Hangouts, again, we're going to try to do it Sunday around 8 o'clock Central Standard Time, and we're just looking for as many people as we got. We got a good crew that has been doing them, and I think you guys have been enjoying them. But for anybody else, any knowledgeable fans, any fans who, you know, just want to come and say, hey, look, I'm a Mayweather fan. I want to talk big about Mayweather, or, you know, I'm a Broner fan. I want to talk about Broner. I'm a Chavez fan. Whatever, it doesn't matter. If you know boxing, if you love boxing, that's who we're looking to give on, man, because this is like I said, exciting time in the sport, and so we just love talking about it. So again, I'm Ishmael Sistrom with the St. Louis American and STLAmerican.com. We're now going to get you out the clinch. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.